Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Liberty Hangout podcast. My name is Justin, and I'm the founder of libertyhangout.org. Before we get started here tonight, I just had a few quick announcements to make. Liberty Hangout is proud to announce that we will be launching two new sister sites for all the sports and technology lovers out there called Sports Hangout and Tech Hangout. The websites will officially kick off later in the week, but until then, make sure that you go and like the Facebook pages. We're going to be posting some really cool stuff and have everything ranging from some Dallas Cowboy haters to lifelong suffering Mets fans that somehow love Alex Rodriguez, aka myself, to computer engineers and so on. Now, tonight we are privileged to be joined by two of the Liberty Movement's finest, in Eric July and Kyle Wagner, who will be duking it out in an Anarchism versus Minarchism heavyweight debate. Standing in the yellow corner is Eric. He is the lead singer of BackWordz and is a contributor to libertyhangout.org, and he will be representing anarcho-capitalism. And in the red corner is Kyle, who many have dubbed the world's most outspoken minarchist, and he is also the chairman of the Misesian Party. Now, before we get started here tonight, Eric, can you tell us a bit about the cool things that BackWordz is working on and the song that you'll be releasing next week? And then, Kyle, would you be able to introduce yourself to the audience since this is your first time on the program?
Sure thing.
Absolutely. Well, again, BackWordz, we've been doing a lot of stuff in the background, as some of you know. A lot of people have been kind of anticipating our album, but we have a lot of announcements coming this upcoming Friday. As well as a new song titled Be Great, new music video. You'll be putting that out, or you'll see that we'll be putting that out. But you'll see a lot of things surrounding it. It's a lot of news backing it. So I think it's going to be a very, very good look, not just for ourselves, but big time for the Liberty Movement.
Awesome. And Kyle, want to go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah. My name's Kyle Wagner. I've been in the Liberty Movement since 2010. When I found Ron Paul. I was actually a delegate for Ron Paul. I didn't get elected, but I was one of the delegates on the ballot in Maryland. For me, it kind of started with the Fed. I was just trying to understand interest rates and inflation to make money investing, and I started digging into the Fed, and it just led me right into the Liberty Movement, Ron Paul, Sound Money, and all of that. And I love the guy. I was just like, this guy he has all the answers I've been looking for. You know, I think we were all at a point where it's like, something's not right, this system's broken, and that was true for me. I wasn't happy about the bailouts. To me, that wasn't capitalism. That wasn't right to bail out people that were already rich. I was like, they screwed up, they should suffer the consequences. So, I was just really motivated. I was really passionate about it. I did sine waves over the highway in Maryland for Ron. I went door to door for Ron. Like I'm a true believer. Like I'm just very extremely into this stuff. I'm also kind of a nerdy guy. I get really into the books, the academia of it, the Mises Institute, philosophy, history. I read so much. And what happened to me was Ron Paul kind of led me into Murray Rothbard, and who everybody probably hopefully is familiar with. He's the modern founder of anarcho-capitalism. And through reading his books, Anatomy of the State, For New Liberty, Ethics of Liberty, and several other articles, and I don't know, Murray kind of became my guru. I got sucked into anarcho-capitalism, and I was just like, man, this guy has it all figured out. And it was last year. I don't want to go past my intro time, but I'm trying to get to how I got to where I am. Last year, the whole anarchism versus minarchism stuff was coming up in the summer, and I started really reading into it, and I learned that Mises was actually a minarchist, which was a huge deal because he's one of the biggest names as far as intellectuals in the history of libertarianism. And as I was reading his stuff, I came to the conclusion that he was right and Rothbard was actually wrong. Rothbard was his student. A lot of ANCAPs think that he just fixed the little mistake that Mises made. I came to the opposite conclusion that Rothbard was wrong and that Mises is actually correct. So I converted, and then ever since then I've kind of been on a crusade to bring the liberty, to unify the liberty movement together as minarchists, because we're kind of fractured right now. It's like we're a house divided. We're going in two different directions. and it just isn't. It makes us so much weaker as a movement that we're not all pulling together in the same direction. So I'm trying to just get us on message, what I believe to be the correct message for us, which is limited government, not anarchism.
All right, so tonight we are going to be debating anarcho-capitalism versus minarchism, and a lot of libertarians, we will recognize that the state is an evil, and we'll analogize it to that of, say, a prison, and we're all being held captive. Now, Eric and myself, we're both ANCAPs, and we would argue that we should see beyond the jail cells and that we don't need captors, whereas Kyle would argue, on the other hand, that society would be better off if we had captors that did very little damage to us. So tonight, this debate is going to be held in the Oxford tradition, and the resolve is the state necessary for society to function? Kyle is arguing in the affirmative, and Eric will be arguing in the negative. To start off with the debate, each participant will be given a 3-minute opening statement, and I'll be keeping time here. Kyle, since you are arguing in the affirmative, we'll start with you. Why is the state necessary for society to function?
Society can't function without an apparatus of compulsion and coercion. A lot of people particularly libertarians, are very against compulsion and coercion. It rubs them the wrong way. But I mean, even the founder of libertarianism, Rothbard, said, let's see, I have his quote here. For it should never be forgotten that a libertarian society does not mean the total absence of coercion, but only the absence of coercion against non-criminals. Those who invade the rights of others by violence deserve their proper check and punishment by the force of law. We aren't pacifists. We cannot be pacifists. If people are going to be committing crimes, if they're going to break into stores, if they're going to rob people, rape, murder, burn down buildings, extort, defraud people, there has to be consequences. We can't just let that slide as a society. So it's important that we're able to actually enforce those laws and also make those laws. I mean, the rules have to be laid out. They have to be clear-cut. It's not like, the three of us can't all live together and play by all different rules. There has to be some uniformity in the rules that we have. And when we talk about compulsion and coercion, I mean, that's really forcing somebody against their will to submit to the rules of our society. So I think what ANCAPs don't realize is how that the law and order actually creates the outer framework of our society. It keeps people in bounds. It keeps them from breaking the rules and from using violence for personal or private gain. It's like a referee. The anarchist notion is essentially like getting rid of the rule book and getting rid of the referees and hoping everybody kind of figures it out on their own. That's just not going to happen. So, I really think the state is actually the foundation of capitalism. Particularly, limited government is the central pillar of capitalism. It's the most important component, and you absolutely cannot get rid of it. We cannot have a capitalist system without a state.
All right, and Eric, why is the state not necessary for society to function?
Okay, all right. First of all, before we even get started, I'd like to clarify my own positions, the position that I'm not taking, as well as kind of define some terms. And I say this because I'm not going to allow, Kyle to kind of debate me into arguing semantics, because that can be a circular conversation. If we both have two different meanings of the same term, we're arguing against brick walls. So I like to discuss actual ideas. Now, Kyle, he's been on social media, he's expressing his disgust with ANCAPs, and he feels as if we bring down a libertarian movement. Now, I don't share the same disgust, and I'm not nearly as animate against minarchism as he is against, anarcho-capitalism. And I'm not even taking the position that, we shouldn't use the political process to scale back on the state. I'm not even suggesting that, I would not prefer an actual minarchist society over, what we have right now. And I'm especially, not saying that we should abolish the state tomorrow and all is going to be good. You can abolish the state and it doesn't mean you've gotten an inch closer to liberty. I've often said that this is a battle of wits and it's not a battle of, might, and minds have to be changed. But the position I am taking is that the ultimate end game is anarcho-capitalism, and it's the far more moral, just, and fair, and peaceful scenario as opposed to minarchism. Now, though we both more so draw from the Austrian school. It doesn't really matter, Chicago or Austrian. Generally, the most prominent economists kind of define capitalism in the same way, and that is the private exchange of goods and services and the free and voluntary exchange of those private goods and services. This does not require a state, and of course ANCAPs do not advocate for one. A state is nothing more than a monopoly on violence and use of force within a given region, and there's no peaceful way to opt out of this forceful rule. And the state has this perceived legitimacy among the majority of people living within this region, and that's the only reason it exists as a state. Now, I know Kyle will probably at some point, try to say that force must exist. I believe he just said that. But we know there's a difference between initiating force and like defense of one's self and defense of one's property. Now, I advocate anarcho-capitalism because I extend things to the logical conclusion. We generally accept that markets do things a lot better, a lot more efficiently, as opposed to it being centrally planned. Security, defense, settling of disputes, protection of property rights are no exception to this idea, and that's exactly why I advocate anarcho-capitalism. Now, Kyle, he advocates against, ANCAP because he can't see a world operating peacefully without a state, and man will inevitably do these immoral things, as he just mentioned. But his fear and ignorance on these things, or anybody's fear and ignorance on these things in a free society, is not proof of anything. It's not an argument at all. His own boy Mises, that he just mentioned, said that if one rejects laissez-faire because of the moral weakness of man, he must reject every government action. Kyle himself has said he's
ding, 3 minutes. All right. Great opening statements, gentlemen. And now we will move on to the next part of the debate. Eric, you will get to ask Kyle any one question, and Kyle will have 2 minutes to answer. If Eric would like to respond to Kyle's answer, you will have 1 minute to do so. Go ahead, Eric.
My question is the state most suited, to maintain, I guess, peace, law, and order? And if they are, why?
The reason it has to be a state and the reason it has to be a monopoly is because of the amount of force that's necessary. When I think you mentioned before you used to be like a gangbanger or in gangs. You should understand that there's always a bigger gang. There's always someone stronger than you. Individuals are absolutely no match for groups. People in prisons figured that out really quickly. They join a gang for protection and for strength because individually they're not strong enough. So what ends up happening is when there's conflicts, people join groups, form groups, get their buddies, arm up, tool up. They just get more and more guns and weapons so that they can ultimately get their way. Are you still there? Freezing up.
Yep. Yeah, we're here.
Yeah, okay. My video is freezing, but hopefully you're still there.
We hear you loud and clear.
So where does this end with, and what I want to talk about is not just gangs, but also factions. ANCAPs can't handle factions of non-ANCAPs, like anarcho-communists, statists, fascists, socialists. There's a lot of people that are never going to voluntarily comply with this system. And you need to be in a position to compel them to comply. You actually have to be the biggest force and power, or they're going to fight back, and they're going to successfully resist. And another thing about anarcho-capitalism is when, there's no reason why a rich aggressor wouldn't have a huge advantage, right? I mean, he's going to want to take advantage of people that can't afford to defend themselves.
Eric, did you want to respond to that? You will have 1 minute to do so.
Well, I mean, I really, that argument doesn't really make sense because he's going on this kind of tirade about, what man will do without the state and how man basically at its core, at its nature, is bound to do these corrupt, bad things, and therefore they need to be punished. But I don't understand why that same kind of principle and why that same alignment and same ideology is not applied to what the state is and what it can become. You just admitted that it had to be a monopoly. It has to be strong. It has to be able to do this big bad thing. However, that it sounds like it's almost, and you literally just said that rich people, they want to use, it's only natural for them to try to basically exploit people and do these bad things. Why wouldn't they use the state to do that? And it's also factually proven that the state is going to kind of multiply what they can do as individuals or do without having a said monopoly on violence, which is why the body count of government is far greater than those of private entities. And ANCAPs don't. I know he went on this rant about what ANCAPs believe and all this, but there's no ANCAP that I know that does not, that believes that the world will be perfect and everybody's just going to be cordial, flowers, and everything's going to be voluntary.
All right, Kyle, you may now ask Eric any one question, and Eric, he will get 2 minutes to answer, and Kyle, you would have 1 minute to respond.
All right. So I guess my question would be, how are you going to handle large factions of non-ANCAPs, people that want a state, Democrats, Republicans, fascists, white supremacists, white nationalists, socialists? I mean, how are you going to deal with these people?
Well, again, first of all, you're already under the impression and you just assume that this is kind of be everybody's ideology. I said from the beginning in my first opening statement that you can abolish the state tomorrow and you wouldn't get any closer to liberty. I would not recommend that the state be abolished with everybody thinking the way that they do. But you did mention a great point, and this is why I feel like anarcho-capitalism is the most superior kind of alignment, because it actually allows for all of what you just mentioned. So as long as they're doing it peacefully and cordially, peacefully, you're able to opt out and do whatever. So if you ask me what I'm going to do about them, if they want to go over there up north and build their own little state and they do that's their business. You know what I mean? I'm not going to advocate against that. That's why I say that ANCAP is the most superior, because under it you can have whatever faction that you want. If you want a society in which all the property is owned collectively, you can have that under anarcho-capitalism, but the same cannot be said for the other ideologies that you mentioned. So this is why I always say that the ANCAP will let the ANCOM and the minarchists and these fascists or whatever, we'll let them be them, so as long as they're not initiating violence on use of force on peaceful people, you can do that. But it's not said the other way around. This is why I say you have absolutely no moral high ground in advocating for a government at all, because you're basically advocating for the forceful rule, over everybody, regardless of their ideology. And what I say is that so as long as, again, you're not forcing people to be within this said society, that's your business. You can do whatever it is that you want, and anarcho-capitalism actually allows for people to do that. And I can't say the same about other ideologies.
All right, Kyle, would you like to respond?
Yeah, of course. I'm having some technical difficulties with Eric's video. Can you guys still hear me?
Yeah, we hear you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. As long as the audio is okay, we're all right. The thing is, the same land is really in question here. These people, the statists, live among us. The only way you would be able to make this function is if you could draw a political boundary and actually separate each other, because, so like, for example, anarcho-communists have a completely different idea for land use than anarcho-capitalists. There's no way these two factions can peacefully coexist in the same area. They would literally need to physically be separated, and then one could have their rules and the other could have their rules, but they can't overlap. It's the same means of production that's in question. It's either going to be one way or the other way. You can't have a half socialist, half capitalist society all interlocking. It's just not going to work.
All right, so we're done with that section of the debate here, and so we'll be moving on to the next part, in which I will be asking you gentlemen the same question each, and you will each have 2 minutes to respond. As libertarians, we are the biggest lovers and proponents of capitalism, and minarchists and ANCAPs alike will agree that it is the best economic system in existence. So my question to you two is this: are the principles of free market economics consistent and able to be applied to all human action and every single serviceable industry? I'll start with Kyle.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question? I'm having technical difficulties with the video.
You hear me here?
I can hear you, but the video is completely frozen.
All right, let me reiterate. So, as libertarians, we are the biggest lovers and proponents of capitalism, and minarchists and ANCAPs alike will agree that it is the best economic system in existence. So, my question to you is, are the principles of free market economics consistent and able to be applied to all human action and every single serviceable industry?
No. You know, a lot of ANCAPs think that you can put a price on anything. The problem is you can't. There's no way to put a price on the protection of an entire society from being crushed by an invading army, or to put a price on Eric's freedom. Some things just don't have a market value. It falls into the realm of power. It falls into the realm of you know, governance. And governance isn't supposed to be for sale. It shouldn't be like, oh, I want to get things my way, so I'm just going to pay more, and then I'm going to get them my way. It doesn't work like that. Like, you know, everybody has to play within the rules of society, basically.
And if you can, go ahead and ask, because I heard you breaking up on the latter half of that question as well. So if you could, I'd love to answer it if you could.
All right, so since we as libertarians, we are the biggest lovers and proponents of capitalism, my question to you is, are the principles of free market economics consistent and able to be applied to all human action and every single serviceable industry?
I don't see how it can't. I mean, we talk about free market and all that is, you know, at least for, again, I don't want to get into redefining terms, but again, we are, at least on capitalists as they advocate for it, it describes it as, you know, basically the free and voluntary, you know, exchange of, you know, private property. And that can exist regardless of ideology. I mean, even if you think about it, I mean, even if you advocate for, I guess, the public ownership of something, you still have to acknowledge the private. It's again, without it, you're committing a blatant performative kind of contradiction. So absolutely, it is you know, consistent. I mean, and we advocate for capitalism because it has been a proven method. Regardless of state politics, definitely is nothing more than a lagging indicator. But regardless of state, it has boosted people's, you know, living standards across any type of you know, area, and it's natural. It is the natural state. If man went around, you know, coercing people into getting whatever it is they wanted, I mean, they would have ended at the first generation. You know what I mean? But it was, again, it's natural. If caveman number one could hunt, and caveman number two could cook or something like that, you know, they had no choice other than to basically freely and voluntarily exchange their services, and it bettered both of their living standards by doing so. So again, it is the far more, you know, and kind of going off point, it is the far more moral capitalism, and it is, you know, we talk about it being consistent, but more in regards to what we're talking about in this conversation, it is absolutely, it does not require a state at all. I really don't understand where you know, Kyle and people as such get off to even suggesting that capitalism absolutely needs a state in order to function. I feel like that doesn't even, you know, pass the smell test.
Kyle, did you want to respond to that before we move on to the next part here?
Yeah, of course. There's a lot of ANCAPs think that capitalism is a default social order. They think that left unmolested, people will just sort of self-organize into capitalism. It doesn't work like that. Too many people don't agree with private ownership of the means of production, or they don't agree. They don't agree with the current distribution of private ownership. They think they've gotten shortchanged and they deserve more than they have, or whatever. So what ends up happening is because we have so many conflicts among the millions and millions of people. We form a governing body to resolve those conflicts. That's sort of how it works. The governing body ends up making the rules and essentially saying, yes, we're going to have a capitalist order. There's going to be private ownership of the means of production, and it lays down a grid of property rights across society where it actually separates people's spheres of control. So the other side of the coin of private property is the state, which enforces private property, which makes private property the rule and enforces it.
Eric, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, all he's saying is basically that he doesn't understand how law and order and enforcement of private property can exist in a free society. But I can't say enough that that is not an argument of any kind. There's absolutely can be third party entities that whether it be enforced contracts, whether it be and obviously they be competing. And this is what I don't understand is about his stance, that we generally, definitely as Austrians, we accept the fact that markets work better than something that's centrally planned. So why do we just stop logical consistency when it comes to things such as enforcement of property rights, protection of property rights, security, and things like that? We just say, oh well, that doesn't make sense. This is where I was going at the end of my deal when I was talking in my three-minute introduction, in which I was talking about how Mises basically also said, his own guy, he said that if you think that man is immoral, and because of their moral weakness, and that's why we can't have laissez-faire, then again you must absolutely, completely, I guess will not be fond, excuse me, of every single government action. That was the problem with Mises, is that he didn't extend it to the logical conclusion. And again, you're self-detonating your own stances. Definitely as a Misesian, if you suggest that man is inevitably immoral, and therefore and we can't be cordial, and we can't be cooperative with each other, we can't enforce these these property rights without each other, or excuse me, without a state being in existence, then you're going against the fundamental idea that you must oppose every single government action. You know what I mean? Again, it's just it's blatantly self-detonating, and it's logically inconsistent.
Kyle, go ahead if you want to respond to that.
Yeah, I'm still having video difficulties, but hopefully you guys can hear me fine. The quote is, if we reject laissez-faire on account of man's moral fallibility, we must use the same logic to reject all forms of state action. He's not saying we must reject all forms of state action. He's saying, you can't reject laissez-faire on the grounds of man's moral responsibility.
Is that not what you're doing, though, Kyle? Is that not exactly what you're doing?
Listen, Eric. Not all men are immoral. A lot of men are good people, and those people should be in charge.
But just because they should, because reasons, like you're not giving me reasons as to why that should be the case. You're just saying, well, it just has to be like that, which is why I was asking in my first question, how exactly are you able to prove that the state is most suited to complete these tasks, in which they have to protect private property rights, in which they have to settle disputes and things like that? Why is it all of a sudden that, again, everything else, every single thing else we talk about, we also understand that centrally planning something is it's impossible. You can't have a bunch of bureaucrats, legislators dictate exactly what the price of things and how something is going to be done efficiently in a market full of thousands and millions of people. We generally accept that, but for whatever reason, this is where the minarchists, again, they just don't extend it all the way to the conclusion. They just suggest that, well, that's a little different when we start talking about protection of property rights and settling of disputes and things like that. I seriously believe that just like everything, just like this cell phone and things we have in our hands, and people are coming up with apps and things, and they're competing with other people. I don't see why it wouldn't be much more efficient if these guys if it was an actual market for said law and order. And in apps, there's nothing that says that it can't be, other than you just saying that, well, I don't understand how it will be able to operate. But again, that is not an argument.
Go ahead, Kyle, and then we'll move on to the next part.
Yeah, I think, again, anarchists make the assumption that anarchy will be a market, and I think that's a fallacious assumption. I think that people, without an apparatus of compulsion and coercion, without a government, I think they're more likely to simply fight over land and resources amongst each other. So I do think that it's their first crack in their chain of logic is to presume a market economy, and then they go from there. But it's like, well, who says we're going to have a market economy? It comes back to the government saying, okay, you guys are going to respect private property or else. The threat of force, the threat of the cage, the threat of the gun is what makes people respect private property. They don't just do it on their own. Now, some people do. Obviously, ANCAPs are good people, and there really shouldn't be a need for much compulsion and coercion against them. But I mean, if you're talking about a gangster or organized crime or even socialists, we have to compel those people to respect the rules of the market.
All right. Great answers. And so now we'll be moving on to the next part here, in which you two will again be able to ask each other any one question. And now we'll start with Kyle. Kyle, go ahead and ask Eric any one question, and he will have 2 minutes to answer, and you will have 1 minute to respond.
Yeah, I'd like, because states are organizations, and they're created by people just forming them, just willing them and forming them. How are you going to prevent people from forming a government?
Again, I've said like 3 times now that this is a battle of wits. The state, this is what funny, I'm not trying to plug my song, but we said in the BackWordz track that the state you're in is a state of mind. This is a battle of wits. Let's stop, I feel like my point is being, all ANCAP's points are being straw man when we suggest, like, all right, well, everybody's thinking the way they do right now. So, and how do we stop people, from basically, you're assuming that everybody in a free society, and it is, again, this goes against the fundamental ideas of Austrian economics, the fact that you think that you can predict that. But anyway, the assumption that I feel like, or many ANCAPs feel as if we're going to win that battle, or how do you stop people? Well, again, it's all about educating people. It is all about educating people. You find, and that's why I feel like ANCAPs definitely, and I admit that we are terrible when it comes to, kind of marketing our alignment and marketing our ideology. I believe, in my opinion, that ANCAPs, and not just ANCAPs, even agorists, you have to kind of come up with market alternatives for people. And then you have to be able to prove, like, they have to be able to see something. All right, this works without government. You know what I mean? So I feel like that's all part of the education process. And when we get to a free, and that's how you get to a free society. You don't get to a free society by just, oh, well, I declare the government abolished. That's not how it works. It has to, again, you have to start changing people's minds, and people have to start realizing that they own themselves, realize that they don't need a ruling class dictating, an inept ruling class trying to dictate everything, in which they've utterly failed at just about everything that they've attempted to do. You got to kind of relay that information, and you have to educate these people in order for a free society to even come about. So we're getting from point A to point Z with that, which you're skipping through everything that's in between that gets us to that point. And I think that is very, very important that we don't make this kind of it's a straw man is what it is, and we don't suggest that ANCAPs are like, well, everybody's thinking the way they are right now, it'll be perfect, fine, and dandy free society, voluntary society. If everybody's thinking the way they are right now, you just somehow abolish the state. For one, it doesn't make sense. That's not how it works. It is going to have to be some type of education process.
Kyle, you want to go ahead and respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, what I got out of that is you would really have to convince a lot more people not to want a government. I think it's really unrealistic to think that you're going to persuade all of these people to not want a government, to get them on board. I don't think the government's just going to quit. I don't think Congress is just going to read it off according to
But on the converse here, Kyle, don't you then as a minarchist have to convince a lot of people that we need small government? Because we have to realize that to the rest of America, I mean, I know a lot of the ANCAPs say that you're a socialist, Kyle, but to the majority of Americans, they are going to think that you are an anarchist.
Yeah, so I mean, I make it very clear that...
Don't you have the same obligations then as Eric here?
Yeah, I do, but I don't have to persuade nearly as many people. I just got to get you guys.
Oh man, no, man, I'm not gonna little bacon for that. That's funny though, but but you, and that's the point. You know what I mean? We all, no matter what our ideology is, or what we adopt, it's going to have to be some type of education. We are both, and that's why I don't accept you suggesting that. Well, you're gonna have to convince a lot of people. Well, again, that's the same for both of us. That's the same for the any kind of libertarian. We are a very, very small
We couldn't
minority.
even get a libertarian to win the Libertarian Party nominations.
That's what I'm saying. So it's very like we can't even agree with amongst libertarians and what we can't even get on the same page. And you mentioned that. So yet alone, we all it's an uphill battle to convince people. Of what it is that we want, you know what I mean, or what we feel is the more moral and what we feel. And this is why I feel like definitely ANCAPs, we win the battle of ideas easily. So if anybody is willing to just listen and at least have somebody kind of relaying that message, because again, I know ANCAPs, they suck at marketing. You get the you're a statist and just really rejecting anybody that remotely wants to learn about it. I'm not advocating for that, but what I am saying is that that's not really or your point to say, well, you're gonna have to convince a lot. Yeah, in order for a minarchist society, you got to convince a lot of people that that is right. And again, honestly, that the constitutionalists and the people that carved out the Constitution, you think they wanted the type of government? They probably rolling over in their grave, seeing that the government that we have, the founders, so to speak, the government that we have right now. So they even failed, you know what I mean, in terms of convincing everybody that this is the way to go. So it's an uphill battle, regardless of what kind of libertarian you are.
You want to respond to that real quick?
Yeah, we don't have to convince everybody. I mean, we just have to convince enough people to win elections, and then we can start changing the laws. And I want to point out that our position isn't as weak as a lot of libertarians think it is, because the status quo is doomed. There's no way we can keep running up these kinds of debts. There's no way we can meet all these entitlement obligations and paying for all these wars. There is going to be an end of the road at some point, and people are going to be looking for alternatives. And it's really important for us as the outsiders, as political outsiders, to get our ducks in a row, to get on ballots, to get candidates, to get great libertarian candidates, so that people actually have a choice, that voters have a choice. It's our job to be that option, to say, and from the outside, we can throw rocks all day long at the establishment. We can say, look at how this Obamacare is working. Look at how these wars in Syria and Libya and Iraq have turned out. Like, these guys don't know what the heck they're doing. You know, put us in charge. We'll be a lot better. Yeah,
I think we also need to throw rocks at windows. I think that'll really that'll really make the economy grow.
Paul Krugman,
now, Eric,
let's do it.
Now, Eric, you can now ask Kyle any one question, and he will have 2 minutes to answer, and you will have 1 minute to respond.
Well, my question to him is, how does he, how does a minarchist society, or how do you stop a minarchist society from becoming like a complete authoritarian government?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, so I've completely lost video at this point. The government is not just completely separate from society. It actually relies on public support. They can't do things that are really politically unpopular. They can do a lot, but I mean, they definitely need, if they get too many outraged voters, they can't get away with that stuff. So the way to do it, it's ultimately up to the citizens. It's up to the people to check their own government. The government checks violent behavior, checks criminals, and what have you, and the citizens have to constantly basically be vigilant to make sure that their government doesn't grow out of control. And what happened in America is not just that we were lazy and we didn't try hard enough to stop it, but the ideas of socialism and interventionism actually became more prevalent in academic circles, in intellectual circles. It got taught in schools, and it spread to all the masses. So this is really it's really a war in the intellectual classes first, to teach the right ideas and then spread those ideas down to the masses until we become a majority. And then we should have a free society. We should be able to maintain a free society by teaching people about the proper role of government, where private enterprise is better, which is consumer areas like healthcare, education, mass transit, that kind of thing, and teaching them what the proper role of government should do. I mean, there's just things that it can and cannot do.
Ding, 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 ding. All right, Eric, you now have 1 minute to respond.
Again, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense why the logic is inconsistently applied. And I just can't say that enough because, Kyle is mentioning that, well, there's certain things that government's just going to do better. And it's like, I don't understand why. Like, it's no actual answer. It's not been an answer yet that said, well, why it is. It's just because, reasons. And I just don't really accept that. But I do agree with the fact that, Kyle is saying that, that we lost the intellectual battle. But then you got to go back to talk about how a lot of that was won at the state level, you know what I mean, with them controlling the public schools, controlling the schools and all of that, and how they were able to basically spread a lot of this misinformation, and not just in the schools, just within the press, the media, and things like that. Again, this is monopoly. This entity is absolutely attractive to the same people that you've said will do these immoral things, and this is why you get these largely authoritarian governments. You're on mute.
There we go. Kyle, did you want to respond to that at all, Kyle?
Yeah, I mean, the majority definitely determines the course of society. If we can't even achieve minarchism, if we can't even limit the state, we're definitely not going to be able to abolish the state. I think anarchists need to consider what their ideology leads to. If they push and push and push, eventually it comes to violent conflict with the state. It comes to civil war, because the state's not going to back down. And if you're not willing to use the democratic process for political change, your options become pretty much violent revolution, or they're just going to keep ruling you. It doesn't help us when, anarchists, and not all anarchists do this, Eric's actually good about this, but some of them, they tell libertarians not to vote or run for office. They basically say, take your ball and go home. That's the absolute opposite thing of what we should be doing. It amounts to a forfeit loss, and it just makes it easier for the socialists to win. So, one analogy I like to use for the state is like the shepherd of a flock of sheep. If we don't become good shepherds, and if we don't try to make society a more peaceful place, there's definitely a whole line of wolves that are willing to take that role and be bad leaders. And I think we've suffered under decades and decades of bad leadership, and that's one of the reasons in reaction to that people have run all the way to anarchy and just said, hey, we don't even need a government, let's get rid of these monsters. And they've run right past the right solution, which is responsible governance.
Eric, did you want to reply to that real quickly before we move on?
Well, I just don't think there's a such thing. I think it's a contradiction as a responsible, governance. Definitely in terms of at least having a monopoly on use of force. I've said 40 times, and I'm not going to put it by the wayside, is that we generally agree that things are done better from market standpoints rather than, a bunch of unelected bureaucrats trying to dictate what the hell it is that we all need to be doing. But I don't understand why we can't have these. What everybody's scared of. Why can't these be? I mean, we have insurance and all these other types of ideas that can be applied. I mean, just generally across the board, contracts. I mean, who's to say that? Let's say an employer, hires somebody and they say, well, you have to sign this, contract in which we say this arbitrary, agency will be the one to settle any kind of disputes, that we have, and you agree to that. That's at least voluntary. You're jumping into this contract, but again, you also have that third party, and again, assuming that, let's say that third party agency becomes corrupt. I mean, generally, how long are they going to be able to last if there's legitimate competition within the market with other agencies that provide the same service and other forms of employment that work with other agencies that are a lot more, positive and objective, at least. So who's to say that we can't have? I mean, again, I just don't accept that as an actual argument, which is, as a lot of minarchists, is ignorance and fear. But that in itself is not if you don't. That's not my problem, because you don't understand that how it's going to work without the state existing, or how contracts are going to be enforced. That is not. We can discuss that, but that in itself is not legitimate to say, well, it can't work. That's just you saying that. Well, I don't understand how it can.
All right, great points. Let's move on now. So for the next part, I will again be asking you gentlemen a question. And now I know that Kyle, he mentioned property rights earlier. So my question to you, Kyle, and is well, to the two of you is, do we own ourselves and do we own our private property, or do others own us and our property? Now, since Kyle and Eric hold different views versus minarchy and anarchy, the questions will be slightly different for each of you. So Kyle, if we do own ourselves and our property, does this then make the state immoral? And by what authority do they have to tell others what to do with their person and their property?
Sure. You know, I don't usually like to use the term ownership applied to yourself. I mean, you are yourself. But when you own something, you have control over it. But you don't have unrestricted control. You know, I can't take my car that's my private property and drive it into a crowd of people. Or into someone's house. There's definitely limits on what you're allowed to do with your property, and those restrictions are placed by government. And also, conversely, my right to have basically limited control of my property is secured by government. So Eric can't come in and just crash in my house. I can call the cops and they can come remove him. I don't have to remove him myself. I'm sure not strong enough to remove Eric from my house if he wanted to come in. So, you know, the government is sort of that ultimate force that kind of, you know, creates order. And you know, when he's talking about like private compulsion, when you have a conflict, right? Like both sides keep escalating the force. Where does that end? I guess it ends with the guy that's the richest, can hire the most guns. He's gonna ultimately win the conflict and get his way, and that just can't happen.
All right, now Eric, given that you agree that the state is immoral and has no authority over us, how then, in an anarcho-capitalist society, can we expect private property to be protected?
Great question, and again, we do own ourselves, that's the reason why slavery is wrong, is because it is the forceful rule over one person to serve the purposes of another individual. You know what I mean? But absolutely, and I will not. I don't want to get baited into the question because it's almost. I don't want to. I know the Kyle types will want me to answer that, but it's asking me to be a central planner. You know what I mean? It's asking me to say, all right, and I think that, again, that goes against the fundamental Austrian economics, and you suggest that, well, how exactly is it going to work? Honestly, I can't say exactly how it is going to work, but nobody can. It's like asking somebody in the 1700s, you know what I mean? Hey, how are you going to communicate with somebody? Let's say you're in South America and you're going to communicate with somebody over there in Asia. How are you going to do that? And you ask them and they say, all right, I've been in the 1700s. Well, I just come up with this complex form and we'll call it the internet, and bam, that's it. You know, it didn't work like that. You know what I mean? So, but again, who is to say? And I just gave that example of maybe like employers. Basically, you sign up to, if you would get employed by them, you say, all right, we're going to have this third party agency. You know what I mean? To enforce any kind of disputes that we have, you agree to these rules and you agree to whatever that agency says is going to be the way we settle the dispute. Now, this can happen. These contracts can exist across the board. You know what I mean? It could be insurance agencies, and you're going to have, you know, people that are businesses and people that say, I'm not going to deal with you if you don't have maybe certain types of insurance, or you're not with a legitimate insurance company that allows us to have some type of protection if you know, wreck our stuff, or you do this or you do that. You know, like these types of ideas, they already exist right now. You know, insurance agencies, you know, they exist right now. Private courts and third-party disputes being settled exist right now. There is absolutely no logical reason to suggest that, well, we have to have this big old, you know, monopoly that dictates what is right and what is wrong. There's nothing literally other than the idea of the people that have, you know, the keys to this state. There's nothing separating that from or the ideal one that you want from one that's an authoritarian government. This is why the burden of proof is on the people like Kyle to prove why that's the more moral position to take, because there has been no example, hardly any example in history where somebody came up to power and said, you know what, we're going to abolish everything, we're going to privatize everything, and then it resulted in the deaths of millions of people. But that's not what, with Zedong and Pol Pot and Stalin and all these people who ran these campaigns and cleansing campaigns and saying, well, I'm doing what's best for society, I'm doing what's best for the people, I care about my people. And it resulted, and just even between those guys that I mentioned, it resulted in like the deaths of 100 and something million people. I believe it's 250 million people that the state alone has killed within this last century. You know what I mean? So again, like, why is it that I'm the one that has to try to prove this? Like, you need to be the one proving to me how that's it, because the burden of proof is on you. We have proof that it has absolutely existed, that these authoritarian regimes and largely authoritarian governments has absolutely existed, and it's resulted in the deaths of millions of people. You can't find me no anarchist society that's resulted in that. So again, I think the burden of proof is on the minarchists to prove that well, what I advocate is not going to become what Hitler did.
All right, moving on here, I'm going to ask you another question. Now, since we are all students of Mises and we agree that it's a part of basic praxeology that humans respond to incentives, in the absence of the state, would there be a greater incentive to cooperate with our neighbors and act peacefully and voluntarily, or is there a greater incentive to employ coercion to get what we want? And we'll start with Eric here.
Well, yes, absolutely. I believe that it's a greater incentive for people to be more so peaceful. And it's not to say, again, I don't want to get straw man here. It's not to say that there won't be instances in which there are going to be people that absolutely do these immoral things, that go kill people and things like that. But there's absolutely market ways that will find ways to punish these said people, to create incentives for people not to go around killing folks. You know what I mean? And again, I mean, we got to this point not because the state dictated, and this is what people like how assume at the state. Well, because the state is punishing people. No, I don't kill people because there's some type of I don't kill people, obviously. But you know what I'm saying? What I'm saying is that I don't go out there.
You kill people in the Facebook comments.
Maybe there, but I don't. It's not like I'm not saying, well, I'm not going to kill you. It's not because the government says it's wrong. It's because, what incentive do I have to absolutely go around, killing people? Definitely, if I don't want that type of aggression on myself. Again, we do accept the fact that people react regarding incentives. Like, again, like if I'm in a free voluntary society and I don't want to die, and I'm not going to go around trying to shoot people's heads off, just for the sake of doing it. I don't, because I don't want that crap done to me. You know what I mean? And I'm blatantly saying that, hey, it's okay to go air me out if I'm going out airing out people just because they exist. You know what I mean? So again, and as I mentioned, this said type of environment does not need a monopoly on violence and use of force to be kind of protected or to even exist. I would argue that we would have ended in the first generation of man if they were on that said track of thinking, saying that, well, I can just make everybody slaves.
All right, now the question jumps to Kyle. Kyle, in the absence of the state, would there be a greater incentive to cooperate with our neighbors and act peacefully and voluntarily, or is there a greater incentive to employ coercion to get what we want?
I think if people are knowledgeable and smart, and they'll realize that it's better in the long term for them if we cooperate. I think social cooperation is one of the highest values, one of the highest moral values you can have. We're much stronger if we divide up labor and trade with one another as a whole than if we steal from one another. With that said, in the short term, there definitely are a lot of people who might take advantage of the fact that there's no state to try to improve their short-term interests and steal to benefit themselves or hurt others to benefit themselves. So I just don't think you can trust people. I mean, you can trust some people, but there's definitely a lot of bad people out there.
All right, so moving on here, we're going to take some questions from the YouTube chat. This first one comes from KOD Red 996. He wants to ask, is taxation theft? And we'll start with Kyle.
Yeah, I had a feeling this one would come up. I've really given a lot of thought to taxation because I know ANCAPs hang their hat on that. Taxation is theft. You know, I can understand that sentiment when you're talking about, hey, you're taking Eric's money and giving it to Justin or giving it to someone else. That's ridiculous. I mean, when we're just redistributing wealth like that. But I think taxation is it's similar to dues. And I think it's payment for communal services like the army, the courts, the prisons, and the police. So it's similar to how, like, if you lived in a community and there was a communal pool that everybody used, everybody kind of chips in toward the maintenance of that pool. You know, so I do think it's that a person, it's okay to pay. They should have to pay for the benefits they're receiving from living in a free society and living under the protection of law and order.
Eric, is taxation theft?
Hell yeah, it's theft, man. I mean, like it's the you're saying that the state has a higher claim to your property. You know, if anything, it's closer to extortion and slavery. But which is, again, you could think of that as a form of theft. But I'd much rather respond to what Kyle said, because again, taxation, it is theft. But he's saying that it's theft because you get some type of service from it. I didn't ask for that. I didn't ask for the state to provide the courts. I didn't ask for the state to provide the police. I didn't ask for any of that. So how can it be? And I didn't ask for them to protect me. I don't want that. I'd rather you know, I'd be gladly to pay somebody to do that. But I didn't ask for the state to do that. You know what I mean? So that's no different from me going to Kyle's yard and I go mow the grass. I go mow his. He didn't ask me. He did not ask me, but I go to Kyle's yard and I go mow the grass, you know, go hop his fence, mow the backyard, and then I go back to the front and I hold a pistol to his head and I say, pay up. You know what I mean? Like, and it's not theft because, you know, you got your grass mowed, even though you didn't ask me to mow your damn grass. You know what I mean? So it is absolutely theft, and it does not become theft because a service is provided, especially if the person didn't ask for the service to be provided.
Right, now this question comes from Dylan Griffin. He wants to know, how can we expect to educate or convince the rest of the world that either anarchism or minarchism is the way to go when we can't even convince each other? And we'll start with Eric here.
Great question. You know what I mean? And that is, again, it's kind of the thing amongst libertarian, and I talk about libertarian infighting all the time. And I think, honestly, in my honest opinion, because, you know, I know Kyle, I see him, you know, in his talks, he aligns more so with those elitist ANCAPs than myself. They're the ones that are down each other's throat, constantly arguing, saying you suck, you're the reason why libertarianism is where it's at, you're the reason why it's advancing. That is not me. You know, you have seen, you know, I'm even friends, you know what I mean, with guys that are minarchist libertarians and things like that. You know what I mean? I've often been for like coalition building and things like that. I don't absolutely just jump down people's throats simply because you know, they are minarchists. I would absolutely more so be cordial, and I'd be up to different kinds of ideas that get us closer to anarcho-capitalism, because I said that's the end game. If there was somehow some proof that there's some way that we can scale back on the state, that still gets me closer to anarcho, you know, capitalism, no matter whether, even if it's me and a minarchist fighting for the same type of I guess you know, thing. You know what I mean? So I'm all for working for people, but I'm just not gonna sit and let people, you know, talk down on anarcho-capitalism and think they ain't gonna come. I'm not gonna come back with some type of argument. You know what I mean? I think it is good that we absolutely discuss different ideas. We discuss methods. We talk about, you know, what's the most effective way to bring about, you know, liberty. And this is what was better, you know, for me. I used to be basically a Marxist, and this is what's so attractive to the libertarian community, is because these types of thoughts didn't really take place in those leftist circles that I was in. You know what I mean? At least amongst libertarians, we could argue, and I can argue with somebody that may have a solid argument for what they advocate, and then I could come with my own argument, and we could somehow, you know, maybe come up with some type of you know, solution. Like if Ron Paul ran as is, I would be supportive of him. You know what I mean? Like if it's gonna get us, if he's gonna campaign to educate people on the dangers of the state, You know what I mean? So I do see the point in what Brother Man is saying. It's like, how do we educate people without, basically even getting on the same page? And it's going to be very, very difficult to do that, because we really can't even agree what the libertarian is, especially when we've got ANCAPs and agorists and minarchists thinking that their way is, thinking that their way to bring about liberty is the way, and you're all stupid. You know what I mean? Like, I don't go there, and I honestly don't even participate more so in a lot of those arguments.
All right, now the question jumps to Kyle, and since Eric was talking for a while, let me reread the question. How can we expect to educate or convince the rest of the world that either anarchism or minarchism is the way to go when we can't even convince each other?
Well, I mean, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm coming on the show and trying to educate and try to make my case for minarchism, and hopefully to the ANCAPs listening for minarchism. I know it's a difficult transition to go from hating the state like it's the great Satan to thinking of it as, like, a really important institution or a critical institution. I just try to use reason. I try to use arguments. I understand, like, we get so caught up in, like, it's immoral, or it's I make utilitarian arguments, which is practical arguments. I try to say, we need this because we can't let large factions fight, and we need to enforce laws, and we need to make laws. I try to make those utilitarian arguments for why we actually need this institution. And I feel like ANCAPs try to make the moral argument. They try to say, well, the whole thing's immoral, so you just can't have it. I think they really missed the boat with that. It's trying to decide what's moral is like, and I'm sorry, I'm just losing my train of thought right now. What's moral is what increases social cooperation and makes our society better. That's what's moral. Like, you can't just say, okay, well, we're not going to have taxes and we're not going to have a state, and then we're just going to hope that everything works itself out. I mean, if that leads us to a situation where crime is rampant and people are fighting, how is that moral? That's not a good outcome. So I don't agree with that. But
if you don't mind me jumping in here, because you said that what's moral is what increases social cooperation. So then if Hitler goes and throws a bunch of Jews in concentration camps where they're told what to do every single day, they're preventing all the Jews from fighting amongst each other, you can say from a perspective that this is increasing social cooperation. So was this then moral, according to your argument here?
No, that would be decreasing the division of labor and hurting them also as individuals. So,
isn't that the whole argument of anarchy against minarchism in the first place, though?
The whole argument of sorry, I don't follow you.
All right, continue.
We were talking about trying to convince people, right?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's really important for us to, like, come up to figure this out. It's important for us to get on the same page so that we're all spreading the same message, and that's why this particular split is so divisive. And how do we spread the message if we don't even agree amongst ourselves? Well, yeah, that's very difficult. That's why all my attention, instead of addressing progressives and conservatives, is on addressing this internal split. I've got all my focus on ANCAPs and trying to bring them on board. Within the libertarian movement, I see three giant camps. I see ANCAPs, I see minarchists, and I see moderates. I'd obviously like to pull the moderates toward minarchism. I would consider Gary Johnson like a moderate, borderline, that's probably being generous, but, and I'm trying to pull ANCAPs into minarchism as well. So I'm just trying to pull us all together onto the same page so that we create a unified force to bring in even more people from the progressive mindset and from the conservative mindset into minarchism.
All right, so now we are going to move into the last part of the debate here, which is the closing statements. Since Kyle started off with the opening statements, we're going to let Eric go first, and you will each have 3 minutes to give your statements. Eric, why is the state not necessary for there to be order in society?
Well, it's not necessary for the same reason that it's not necessary in just about every other human affair that we we participate in. And I am most ANCAPs as they are. You know, we're voluntarists. We advocate for voluntary exchanges. We feel like every at least as close as we can get. We should push for all human exchanges to be voluntary. This is not to say that we believe in this utopian idea that all exchanges will be voluntary. It's just absolutely, you know, what we advocate for, and we see within, you know, just our everyday lives how voluntary exchanges has benefited us, how it has created better products, produced great goods, great services, and it could be absolutely no different. No, absolutely no different for anything that the government actually provides, which, and again, they don't really, I mean, provide anything. All they do is coerce people and pay other people to do things. You know, so absolutely anarcho-capitalism is what I advocate, because I extend what Mises said to the logical conclusion. I do not accept the idea that we all of a sudden have to hit some stopping point in which, you know, we suggest, and as he said, you know, as Mises said, as we've all heard the quote, you know, if you're going to reject it, you know, because of the moral weakness of man, you must reject every government action. All I've done, and all Rothbard did, and all, you know, the Woods and the Rockwells and all they did was extend it to the logical conclusion. And the logical conclusion is that, okay, well, you know, if I'm against that said government action, I must be against government in general. You know what I mean? Because those are the security, the courts, everything that Kyle has been here saying that the state just absolutely must provide. Those are all government actions, and if we feel as if they must exist, or he feels as if they must exist, because man will do all of these bad things, it doesn't even make sense. It doesn't really, again, pass the smell test. He would logically, out of consistency, reject every single government action because of what the state is, and it is a monopoly on violence, and that has historically attracted the most dangerous individuals, because once they get a key to the state, they can do pretty much whatever it is that they can get away with. And we've seen so many people even running on the same rhetoric that Kyle has been here advocating, saying that, well, we just have to do it. It's just for the greater good. There's been so many people so many examples that we could point to in which you've seen result in deaths of millions and millions and millions of people. But what we don't see is a society or a region that said, hey, I'm going to privatize everything, and that resulted in 50+ million people, as like the Zedong's cleansing did, in which he completely ignored his own constitution. There's things that you guys, write. He completely ignored that, and then it killed 50 million plus people. So just out of consistency, anarcho-capitalism is the way to go if we are going to extend what guys like Mises and a lot of Austrian economists and people that advocate the Austrian way, what we advocate, if we're going to extend it to the logical conclusion, it only makes sense that we push for anarcho-capitalism in a free society.
All right, and Kyle, why is the state necessary for there to be order in society? 3 minutes.
Okay, well, a lot of ANCAPs use the term voluntary and voluntary exchange. I want to point out that capitalism is not voluntary to a lot of people, particularly ANCOMs and socialists. They do not like it. They do not like free market capitalism. They are coerced into the system, coerced to respect life and property. It's an order. And, you know, for ANCAPs to just say, oh, any market exchange is voluntary, well, the entire market order itself is not voluntary to everyone. With the Mises quote, where it's like, you can't reject laissez-faire on the basis of man's moral fallibility, or I guess it was if you reject. What he's saying is you cannot reject laissez-faire on the basis of man's moral fallibility, and neither can you reject all government on the basis of man's moral fallibility. Just because some men are immoral doesn't mean that we shouldn't have a government. You know, there is such a thing as good government. I know we haven't seen it in a really long time, but you know, if we had a good government and it was just very limited to the protection of life and property, you guys likely wouldn't even be ANCAPs. It would have never even occurred to you to abolish the government in the first place because the government was so good. And one thing that Eric does a lot is he'll say, like, what about Mao? What about Stalin? What about Hitler? This is a total straw man argument. He's using big government to attack all government. You know, I'm not an advocate for those kinds of rulers, for authoritarians, for even for Donald Trump or Hillary. I thought Ron Paul would have made an ideal president. I would love to see a Congress full of Ron Pauls and a president, Ron Paul. And obviously, we're not going to get the same man, but people who believe in his ideas, believe in the Constitution, believe in private property, sound money, peace, and free markets. If we could get those kinds of people elected, we would have a much freer society, and things would be a heck of a lot better. But we're going to go through a hell of a lot of economic turmoil before that ever happens. And if we're lucky, we won't get taken over by some horrible dictator, because typically when there's problems, the control freaks, the authoritarians gain control, the white knights, you know. People are scared, they've lost everything, riots are in the streets, and people go to that strong hand. So I definitely think that's a threat in the future. I think that inflationary problem or debt crisis would benefit the other side, which is the control freaks. Obviously, you know, we're the polar opposite of that. We're the laissez-faire, the liberals, the people that just pretty much want to leave people alone, except we just don't want you to, like, murder people and steal. So we just have a little bit of a limit on how much freedom people can have. But I really don't want to go beyond that. I don't want to let people kill and steal. You know, we definitely need that check.
All right, so before we wrap it up here tonight, I want you guys to give a little introspection about each other's arguments made tonight and each other's closing statements. Kyle, you want to start here?
Yeah, I mean, I really like Eric. I've always liked him. He's a real, like, laid-back guy. He's really smart. Like, you know, he makes a lot of great points about, like, the crazy ANCAPs. And there is a crazy faction of ANCAPs that just, like, it's their religion, and they just go ballistic on anybody that likes the police. You know, they say F the police, F the troops. They're very impolite. They really reflect poorly on all libertarians. Eric's never been like that. I mean, Eric is, like, definitely a voice of reason on the ANCAP side. You know, and it was really cool to be in a debate with him and get to hear, you know, his ideas. You know, I've tried my best to make the case for limited government, and I really don't think that you know, obviously, that having no government is going to be a peaceful capitalist society.
Eric, you want to provide your reflections on those arguments made tonight?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's always a good conversation, you know, to be able to, you know, talk about things that we talked about. These we need to have a lot more. It doesn't even have to be formal, but we need to have more substantive debates, discussions about, you know, these particular topics, because I think what ends up happening is, and I even saw it a little bit here, where there's misrepresentations of actual arguments, misrepresentation of stances, really misunderstandings of what people actually advocate. And I think the more we have these types of conversations, rather than having constant, constant shouting matches all the time, I think it's a lot more productive to have these kinds of discussions in which we actually get the ideas out there, and we actually start talking about ideas. Okay, what is it that you believe? Why do you believe this? Rather than saying, okay, you're wrong, I'm right. You know what I mean? So I absolutely think these discussions are important. I think they're valuable. I think they're absolutely really very, very just important in general if we're going to advance any type of libertarianism. And I do like the fact that, you know, parties can come educated to these said debates and actually debate actual ideas. You know, but again, I will forever be an advocate of ANCAP, simply because, again, I just extended to the logical conclusion.
All right. Well, thank you, gentlemen, so much for coming on to the debate tonight. It was definitely a very informative and fun discussion to get both sides of the anarchism versus minarchism debate here. And for all the people that were watching, let us know in the comments, the chat. Let us know who you thought won. And Eric, I gotta ask, you're wearing a shirt, Dallas Mavericks shirt, that says "The time is now." Given that Mark Cuban has endorsed Hillary Clinton, is the time still now?
Oh man, this was the 2011 shirt, that, you know, playoff shirt. that we had, when we won it all. You know what I mean? So, but yeah, Mark Cuban sucks for doing that, man. I tell it to his face, man. He got it wrong.
Couldn't agree more. Now that we got both sides of the anarchism versus minarchism debate, I just kind of want to get your guys' opinion here. Do you think that there is definitely a room where anarchists and the minarchists kind of agree that we can work together with this common ground to try to bring people towards libertarianism? Do you think we should be focusing more on that versus having these types of arguments?
Me personally, I think that we should. I don't know. I think the conversations are good, but you think about some of the guys that we talk to at even between the parties, and like being libertarian, and we got all kinds of people that are ANCAPs. We have minarchists, classical liberals, those, even some moderates. But we still, we kind of advance what libertarianism is. So there's absolutely room for it. Will I say that we should stop the conversations? Not necessarily. I think they're productive. I think actually now we're starting to see more of these conversations and debates pop up, which is good, because then you put the information out there and you let people make decisions, for themselves. But absolutely, I think there's absolutely some areas that we can all, work together to get some type of common goal. I mean, we all agree that the government as is sucks. You know what I mean? But it's all about each party, no matter what side of libertarianism you're on. It's all about putting forth some type of idea that says, okay, or some type of method in which it says, all right, this is going to work. We're going to be able to scale back government and get us closer. And the more we scale back on it, we're going to get it closer to our ideology, no matter where we're at. You know what I mean? If we scale back on it in some way, shape, or form. If there's proof that can happen, no matter if it be through politics, whether it be through the market, or something like that, which is, again, what I advocate. I don't necessarily advocate for either or. I don't down talk people for doing either. I think there's strides to be. You can't deny Ron Paul's, what he's done for libertarianism. You can't deny that, and by using the political process, even the youngsters right now with Rand Paul, we can't deny what happened. You know what I mean, with that, but I also can't deny how, other people have came to libertarianism by other ways, not the political process. I was one of them, you know what I mean? I was reading, books, you know what I mean? I don't have one of them here, but, I was reading books and stuff like that. Yeah, I do have one, who isn't really necessarily a libertarian, but reading stuff like this by Thomas Sowell was a way that got me, you know what I mean? And Walter Williams, who is a libertarian, reading his basic economics book. So everybody has different ways we can go about changing people's minds. If you can prove that there's an effective method, no matter what way you're on, if you can prove that it works, I'm on board.
All right, now Kyle, I know that you were mentioning in your arguments tonight, you were saying that your goal is to bring some of the ANCAPs over to minarchy. Would you say that ANCAPs still have a seat at the table at this political discussion, being that we push people's thinking to its boundaries?
I guess I consider them like cousins or allies to some extent, but I want to say, like, in my opinion, the struggle for liberty is actually a political struggle. It doesn't really matter how much we talk on Facebook if the laws don't get changed, the troops don't come home, the income tax doesn't get abolished, the welfare state doesn't get abolished, the Fed doesn't get abolished. I mean, all that stuff gets done by lawmakers. And if somebody like Eric wanted to take a leadership role in society and run for office, I would support his candidacy. If he wanted to be a mayor or something like that, can you imagine Eric with his knowledge of economics and what policies really help people actually being in a position to actually change the laws? It really would magnify his influence by, tenfold at least, or whatever. Somebody like Thomas Massey or Justin Amash that's in office is in a much better position to influence the course of society than someone like myself or Eric, who are just talking, on social media. So I really think that elections, if ANCAPs could do one thing, it would be the kind of ANCAP that helps us politically instead of hurts us politically. Don't be the kind that says don't vote, don't participate in the process, it's all a big joke or whatever, mock the political process, mock voting. I really wish they would stop that. That really cripples us as libertarians, because we're the guys actually trying to change things. We're the guys that actually want to cut the spending and institute free markets. and so it really hurts us when the ANCAPs do that. So it undermines our cause. So, and Eric doesn't do that. To his credit, he's at least supportive of politicians that are libertarian leaning. And granted, it's hard to even find hardcore ones like a Ron Paul. I mean, if you know, it's really hard to find another Ron Paul. I don't know if anybody's noticed that, but you know, be the next Ron Paul. That I would hope that that'd be a good message for ANCAPs. Follow in his footsteps.
And I think that's a beautiful way for us to end tonight. Be the next Ron Paul. I want to thank you guys again for coming on tonight, and thank you guys so much for tuning into the Liberty Hangout podcast. Make sure you subscribe to the Liberty Hangout podcast on iTunes. Subscribe to our YouTube channel here. Like us on Facebook. Also, make sure you go like Sports Hangout and Tech Hangout now on Facebook. And we'll have more information coming during the week about the launch of the websites. Follow us on Twitter at Liberty Hangout, and make sure to check out libertyhangout.org to read some awesome liberty-minded material from a great lineup of writers. Thank you guys so much, and we will see you again next time.